the official name of the product as it's released to our customers is Guided Conversations. Okay, so what is it? So it's our next level tool for supporting our chatbot. It allows then customers and teams alike to intuitively and effectively choose their own path. That's kind of a vague definition of what it is, but let's go back to kind of what problem it might solve. So before we had guided conversations, basically when you ask Capacity a question, it gives you basically a one-off answer. And that's the only thing you're going to get. There's no context. There's no, it depends, depending on whether or not you go through this category or another category. I can route you to a different response. It couldn't really do that before guided conversations. And what this lets us do is it gives the power to the Copilot to actually dictate what paths are available for drafting a response to a user or somebody who's interacting with the bot. So again, long story short, the point of this is you don't necessarily always want a one question, one answer response to an inquiry. And what we've tried to do is we've tried to build a tool that will let you configure how the bot will answer, depending on possibly paths, depending on certain actions that the user might do. And as you'll see later, we can also trigger actions like sending email or sending information to an application as a result of a specific conversation that's happening. Okay? So let's talk through like what is this really used for, or what example use cases do we have both internally here at Capacity and as well as possible use cases that would be present in with other customers. Okay, so the first one is kind of like same thing that I described earlier. If you have a nuanced question, so let's use an example where I am asking for benefits information. The benefit information that I might need to get might be dependent on whether or not I am a full-time or a part-time employee at a company, right? So say, for example, 401k is only available for full-time. 401k matching might not be available for a part-time employee. So if I ask, what are my 401k benefits, and Capacity doesn't know whether I'm a full-time or a part-time employee, the answer is actually different, right? So one thing we can do is we can ask the user, well, are you a full-time or a part-time employee? User gives them an answer. Let's say I'm part-time. We route them to an answer that's relevant to them. Basically, we would say, sorry, actually, 401k is not available for part-time employees. If you're full-time, it gives you a different answer. So that's one. So any nuance, really, basically think of any question that you can think of. And if the first thing that comes to your mind when you're trying to answer the question is, it depends, that's the kind of example of a nuanced question that we're talking about here. Okay? Second example is collecting information from a new lead on a website and sending that information to your CRM. So as you're aware, there's a lot of companies that have Capacity on their public-facing websites, right? Somebody who's a prospective customer might go to the website and say, oh, I'm actually really interested in a demo for this product. Can you reach out to me to schedule a demo? So one thing you can do with guided conversations, apart from routing, is collect information from that person. It'd be a public website. You might not necessarily know anything about that person, right? So you can ask, for example, well, what's your name? What's your email address? Can you give us a phone number? And maybe, what's the best time for us to reach you? And is there anything in particular that you might be interested in learning more about our product, right? So these are all valid questions you can ask anybody off a website. We can collect that information using guided conversations, and then we can actually send that information using either email or a connection to a specific application, like say Salesforce, HubSpot, something like that. Send that information directly to your CRM. So that's use case number 2. The third one is kind of similar to the second use case, but in this one, what we're trying to do is we're trying to help somebody who actually already bought the product that we have. You can collect contextual information about a customer's issue, and you can send it to, instead of a CRM, maybe your help desk software. So say, for example, I work at a company that that's trying to work on, that does technical support for a specific product. So if I if I'm a customer of that company, I am going to go on the website because I need help, and if nothing looking at the website, nothing there is going to answer the question that I have, maybe I talk to the bot and say, I need help with, this bug that I think I found in your software. One thing we can do is we can ask, again, by collecting information from the user, we can ask, okay, what problem do you think you're having? What's your email address? What's your name? Is it okay for us to call you by phone? Is it okay for us to send you an email directly, or would you do a web conference with us? All of those questions are perfectly valid to ask that person that's interacting with Capacity the bot on a website, and be able to say, okay, I'm going to collect that information and I'm going to send it to your favorite help desk software. Whether that be Capacity's help desk software or some other platform like Zendesk, perfectly fine with us, as long as we can integrate with that application. Okay? So let's talk through what the key components of guided conversations are. And when we talk about key components, what you'll actually see is basically the individual cards that we use to actually build a guided conversation. So we're going to go through this on the slides, and then later on what I'll do is I'll show you in the demo what this looks like. So basically, guided conversations right now is made up of 5 cards, multiple paths, collect information, email card, action card, and a conclusion card. So all of these cards are currently available on the Guided Conversations builder, and you can select every single one of them on that builder. So let's go through what each of these does. Okay, so the first card that we're going to talk about is the multiple paths card. So the multiple paths card presents the users with multiple options to choose from. So let's go back to that example of the full-time or the part-time employee, right? So the answer is different depending on whether or not you're one or the other. So one of the things that it can do is it can present those 2 options to the user. So in this case, for example, or in the example that I mentioned, you can say we can define a path. So each path in that multiple choice card is defined by a chip. And each of those chips could be defined by the person building the guided conversation. So it could be yes or no. It could be full-time, part-time. It could be something else. And you can actually put several of these chips onto the guided conversation. And each one of them will define a different route for that conversation. Okay? So if you select full-time, goes one direction. If you select part-time, goes another direction. Okay? So that's what a multiple paths card is. So the second one is the collect information card. And this is really more useful for that second and third use case that we talked about. And what it does is it enables the copilots that are building these conversations to create dynamic variables that are going to be used throughout that guided conversation. So this part of the collect information card basically is the message that you can ask that user. And the save reply as box here, that gives you the ability to name that response. So whatever you collect, so bot will basically ask, what is your name? And any response that we get from the user, we save it as that person's name. So it's a dynamic, basically it's a way to store a variable within a conversation. So for Bob, it would be Bob. For Sally, it would be Sally. Okay? And then what that does is it lets us collect different types of information. So let's go back to the 2 use cases I have, the lead and the customer support issue. So you can ask contact information, of course, but you can also say, like, what's going on with your product? Or you can say, what part of the product are you actually interested in? Or what's the key pain point you think that we need to solve with your with your company? So you can ask all sorts of different questions using a collect information card. And what we'll do is we'll just collect everything basically everything that user says. Okay, next card is what's called an email card. And what it does is, say you collect different pieces of information from the person interacting with the bot. What this lets us do is it enables us to send an email with that information. So you can incorporate any of the collected variables that you might have had in that guided conversation. And you can fill it out basically just like any email. So any email would need some type of email address. So in this case, you can either have an email variable that you define, or you can write your own email address. Or say, for example, a good example of this is for a customer support email site, for example. You can say send to support@capacity.com. So it all routes to the same place. The email subject field, let's just fill out any subject you want. You can say something like, okay, this is data that's been collected from our website, or you have a new lead from your website. Something like that that could help you identify when you're reading your emails that it actually came from the guided conversation that you set up. And then finally, the email body field lets you define the content of the email. So you can say, hi, if we collected your name, here's the record of your chat with Capacity. And so this blue variable here is actually a special variable that we also have. It lets us collect the history of the conversation with that person. So it's actually an extra variable that we also have. All right, the second to last one is the action card. So an action card is think of it as kind of a special email card. Instead of sending it to an email, you can send that information that you collect to an application. So you can select any action that is available in this drop-down menu, and you'll see an example of this later when we do the demo. So each of these actions is basically, if we go on the technical side, it's basically an API call. And an API call to an application requires some type of input or some type of information that it needs to collect. And then what that does is it should send an output, something resulting from sending that information to the application. So here we have a field to define the inputs for that action. In this case, for example, it's just going to ask for, I think OMDB is a movie app. It's trying to find information about specific films that have been released. So the input could be a movie. And then the output display shows all of the available options that result from sending information to that application. So if I sent a title of a movie to an application, what this is saying is I can get information about actors in that movie, the country, the director, the rating, et cetera, et cetera. And this is application dependent. So say, for example, let's talk about the CRM again. It could be, the action could be something like create a lead. And the input of that could be the information, the first name, last name, and email address of the person you're collecting information from. The output could be something like, here's the Salesforce entry number for that specific lead. Okay? And then finally, the conclusion card. What it does is it sends a message to the user that basically we've collected or we're done with the conversation and this conversation has ended. So this can also be employed to let the users know that an action has taken place. So say, for example, let's use the CRM example again. We've sent this information to our sales team. We'll be in touch. Something like that could be the content of a conclusion card. Okay? So those are the 5 key components of guided conversations right now. Are there any questions so far? Don't be shy. Yes, Ben.
What are some examples of use cases for the email capability?
Yeah. So for the email capability, it could be, so here's something that I know from working in tech support that happens a lot is those support emails, like say for large companies, support@company.com, when you send an email to that support email, it actually doesn't connect to somebody's like email address or email browser. What it does is it could connect directly to a help desk software. So my previous company, it was basically when you sent an email to that email address, it creates a ticket in Salesforce for your support team to open. So that's a great example of something where you take that email and then it creates a ticket in a help desk software, and the person on the other line basically doesn't need to do anything else.
Hey guys, quick question, Cherry, for internal use cases, both just for the purposes of when we're connected to an authenticated environment and when guided conversations will trigger to our help desk, that user won't have to capture information. We'll be able to route that intuitively, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So actually, that's one of the things that we're working on is if we are authenticated, we should already know who you are. And things that are available because we authenticated should be something that's accessible within guided conversations.
Awesome. Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on, we'll close the slide deck, and what we're going to, yeah, go ahead, sure.
Is this only in Web Concierge, or will this work in Slack and Teams and other UIs?
Okay. Yeah. So the question is it only on Concierge, or can it work in Slack, Teams, or any other interface we support? The answer to that is we support any of the, it will work in any of the interfaces that we work with. So actually, it's a great segue, Ben, because what I'm going to demo is actually on Slack. But it works on Guided Conversation Concierge as well. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to show you is actually, it's kind of like a cooking show. I'm going to show you a finished product. So the first guided conversation I'm going to show you is actually one that we have here at Capacity. So you can ask your Capacity bot right now about this. So for example, you can ask Capacity what our company offered benefits are. And if you look at this conversation, if you ask what are the company benefits that we have, so benefits is a very vague term, right? So the nuance part is missing in that question. So that could mean I'm asking for dental information. Or it could mean I'm asking for medical information or our 401k information. So, we don't want to delete that chip. So this is how it would work. So if I type company benefits, okay. All right. So the first thing it's going to ask is, this is basically going to trigger the multiple choice card, right? So the multiple choice card offers 4 options: dental, medical, standard, or 401k. And so this is supported in any interface. So here, for example, in Slack, it'll basically look like buttons. In Concierge, it'll look like buttons as well. And you can just select any of those options. And what that will do is it will trigger the guided conversation to go the route of the dental information. And what information would you like to know about our dental insurance? So you can ask about the monthly costs. You can ask about where's our enrollment form and where's the benefit summary of that. So you can ask about the cost, and that'll give you a different answer, right? So again, before guided conversations, if you just ask that question, what basically we would have to do is actually what we just did here, which is I just dumped everything that I think you might need, right? This way, what we can do is we can route to like, what is it that we really need? What kind of information do you really need? And give you that specific piece of information that you're looking for. In this example, I only have one app that we can use. It's OMDB. It's basically going to collect information from, or it can send information about movies, basically, okay? But imagine it could be any application, right? So think of your CRM later on, okay? So for this case, what we're going to do is, we're going to collect information from the user, namely the type of the movie that they want to know. And then we also want to collect what kind of information they want out of that movie, okay? And then we're going to send that application to, or we're going to send that information to the app. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make a collect information card, and we're going to save the reply of the user as movie, okay? And what we're going to ask the user is, what movie would you be interested in? Okay. Then after we collect that information, that variable will be saved under that movie tag. Then the next thing we can do is we can ask the user, well, okay, we know what movie you're interested in. What information would you be interested in? Okay. So we could say, I am interested, so that person might be interested in the director of the movie. So we're going to make a chip just for the director. And what we'll do is, down that path, we'll answer the question of who the director is of that movie. The other is we can say runtime, right? So I'm interested either in the director or the runtime. And that will be another path down the guided conversation. Okay? So if we select, I did that a little quickly. So what we're going to do next is we're going to build what happens after each one of those paths have been chosen. So we're going to define each one. So we're going to define the director one first. And what we're going to do is we know what the movie is, and we are going to create an action to find that director information for that movie. To do that, we're going to add an application to this guided conversation. And for that, we're going to use the application that's IMDb. So this is the part where our dev platform and our integrations with our different apps is actually really important, because these are the apps that we're going to use in the guided conversation. So if you had a CRM, it would be Salesforce. If you had marketing email, you'd go HubSpot, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new action card. And for each of these applications, there could be a lot of things you collect, or there are a lot of things you could do with that, right? So if you're a CRM, you could create a lead, or you can update notes, or you can schedule a call, something else, right? This one just does one thing. So you can click the OMDB action, and then that OMDB action, it requires one input. And that one input in this example would be what the movie name is. So we collect the movie name, and you can insert any of the variables that you collect using this insert button. So if you collected, so let's go back to the example of the CRM, right? If you collected name, first name, email, phone number, you can insert any of the variables that you collect using this insert button. And you'll see this insert button in a lot of places here. Okay? So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to insert the name of the movie. And here are the outputs that result from that action, meaning here's the information that we got from the OMDB application that relate to that specific movie. So we can get actors, country, director, Metascore, all sorts of different information from the application after we've sent that information. And then what we can do is then we can make an email card. In this case, I'm just going to send it to myself. And the email subject would be what the movie director is. And then we can create an email body that just says the director of the movie is director. So here, as you can see, now you can insert not just the input variables that you've collected, but you can also send the outputs that are resulting from that application. Okay? And then finally, you can write a conclusion card saying, like, this is the director of the movie. So we can define that for the director and as well as for the runtime. So what this lets us do is define basically the response for every path that you have in that guided conversation. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. So if I type, let's do one more thing, by the way. So I skipped over the how do you trigger this guided conversation. So if we go back to the exchange, keeps going back. All right. Here. So the way you would trigger a guided conversation is basically you specify the inquiry that will then trigger the guided conversation. So here, if I click Edit Conversation, this is the conversation that we just built, right? And if we go back to the exchange, what I'm saying here is every time I ask find movie information, I want you to trigger this guided conversation. And like all of our other exchanges, you can add additional inquiry variants to this. So you can say find movie info, I want to know something about a movie, things like that. So anything that you'd want to say to be able to trigger that conversation.
The NLP engine applied to the exchange as well.
So if you're asking, is the NLP engine applied to the variance part?
If I say find movie info, find movie, whatever, send out more information, will the NLP pick that up?
Yes, it will pick that up, right? Yes.
Are all features of guided conversations, chips, et cetera, all available in every single permutation of the interfaces we have, so Slack, Teams, WC, etc.?
Yes, so your question is, are all of the permutations of the guided conversations features available in all of the interfaces we support? Yes. So I'm going to show you what it looks like right now on Slack. Works the same way in Concierge, works the same way in Teams, works the same way in all of our other interfaces. Yes.
The output objects that I saw for OMDB,
Yeah.
were those pulled from like an API for OMDB?
Yes.
So if we have an API for Salesforce, would it pull a list of all the objects out of Salesforce?
Correct, yeah. So what it'll do is it'll pull it'll give you a list of every single variable that the API will supply us. Yeah. Okay. So let's see what that looks like on find movie information. Anybody have a movie in mind? Joker? Seems like it's everybody's favorite. All right. So to trigger this guided conversation, we're going to say find movie information. And then is it the Joker or Joker? I think it's just Joker, right? So the movie I'm interested in is Joker. So in this case, what it's going through right now is it's collecting that information onto that movie variable, right? And then here, it's going to go through that multiple path card. So the question is, what information would you like to know? Either the director or the runtime. And again, this is specific to Slack. The buttons look like this in Slack, but in the other interfaces, basically we would display chips in some type of interface appropriate way. So if it's Concierge, you'll see basically the little buttons that we have. In Teams, I think it's like basically a set of options, but the idea is the same. You get to pick an option, and then it goes down that route. So I would like to know who the director of Joker is, and then it gives me the answer. The director of the Joker is Todd Phillips. And so I kind of skipped because you don't see this part, but what the email does is it actually also sends, me, if I respond to it, there it is. It also responds with the email. Somebody was running the guided conversation for that. Okay? All right. So that's how you build a guided conversations, and that's how you can use it right now.